In the great alien court, silence ruled the hall. The alien king sat proudly on his throne, the queen by his side, and hundreds of nobles filled the chamber. All eyes turned when the young alien princess stepped forward. She looked small, but carried the royal glow that made the crowd bow in respect. Everyone expected her to greet the king. Everyone expected her to honor her people. But instead, she turned her glowing eyes toward the human guests standing at the edge of the court. With a soft voice that echoed across the hall, she said one word, "Daddy." The hall froze. Every noble stopped breathing. The queen lowered her gaze, and the king's face turned to stone. Whispers filled the air. Did the princess just call a human her father? And in that moment, the king slowly rose from his throne, his voice heavy with fury and confusion. Under the high ceiling of the alien court, a strange silence rested in the air. The hall was wide and bright, filled with banners of silver and gold that hung from the walls. At the center stood the long throne of the alien king and queen. The nobles had gathered from every corner of the empire, their colorful robes glowing under the lights. They whispered softly to each other, waiting for the moment when the royal family would appear. The king sat with his shoulders straight, his face carved with pride, his crown shining like fire. Beside him, the queen watched with calm eyes, her beauty mixed with a hidden strength. At her feet played the little princess, small in body, but carrying the same glow that marked her royal blood. Everyone adored her, for she was not only the child of the throne, but also the future of the kingdom. When she stepped forward, all eyes followed her. The princess walked carefully to the center of the hall. The sound of her steps was the only sound in the silence. The nobles leaned forward, curious about what she would do. Many thought she would bow to her father. Others believed she would speak words of honor to her people. The king himself waited, with pride, expecting his daughter to show the first sign of her royal training. But something no one imagined happened. The princess turned her head, her eyes searching the crowd until they stopped at the edge of the hall. There stood a guest, a human ambassador invited to the court. He was quiet, unsure why he had been given a seat of honor among such powerful aliens. He had come only to speak of peace, to build bridges where old wounds still lived. He stood alone, trying to show respect without drawing too much attention. The princess looked at him with shining eyes. Then, in a soft but clear voice that carried through the entire hall, she spoke a single word, "Daddy." The sound echoed like a bell. The human froze, his heart jumping. The king's eyes widened, and the queen lowered her gaze to the floor. The nobles gasped, their whispers rising like a wave. Some covered their mouths. Others turned to each other in disbelief. It was as if the very pillars of the hall had cracked at the sound. The human felt the world tilt around him. He had never seen the princess before. He had no connection to her. Why would she call him that word? His breath caught in his chest as the princess repeated it, her small hand pointing directly at him. "Daddy." The king slowly leaned forward. On his throne, his sharp eyes locked on the human. His face was unreadable, but the weight of his gaze pressed on everyone in the court. The nobles fell silent again, holding their breath, waiting for the storm they feared was about to come. The queen's eyes remained lowered, but there was something in her stillness, something hidden that no one could name. She did not look surprised. She did not even flinch. Instead, her calm face only deepened the mystery. The princess, innocent and unaware of the shock she had caused, walked closer to the human. Her steps were light, her voice bright with warmth as she called the word again. The human took a small step back, unsure if he should respond, unsure if the king's eyes would allow him even to breathe. Whispers spread again through the hall like wind through dry leaves. Did she call him her father? How can this be? Is the queen hiding something? The crowd's curiosity burned hotter with each passing second. No one had ever seen such a thing before. For a child of the royal blood to call a human daddy was unthinkable. It was against every law, every tradition, every pride of the throne. The king's hands gripped the arms of his throne. Slowly, he rose to his feet. His tall figure seemed to shake the hall itself. The nobles bowed their heads at once, unable to face him. His voice had not yet spoken, but his silence carried a weight greater than any words. The human felt his heart pound faster. He had been invited to the court as a guest, a stranger from a distant world. Now, without warning, he was the center of the greatest scandal in the empire. He looked at the princess, her innocent smile, her small hand reaching toward him, and he realized there was no mistake in her eyes. She believed the word she spoke. She meant it. The king's voice finally broke the silence, deep and steady. It carried across the hall like thunder rolling over a quiet plain. "Explain this." But there was no explanation. The human could not speak. The princess clung to him with simple faith, and the queen's silence guarded secrets that no one could yet see. The court stood frozen, trapped between disbelief and fear, as the king's shadow stretched across them all. And so the hall, that had once been filled with whispers of politics and pride, now held only one question: why did the princess call the human daddy? And what truth lay hidden behind the queen's quiet eyes? The answer, they knew, would change everything. The hall remained heavy with silence even after the king's words had ended. All eyes still rested on the human, who stood frozen in place. He felt every glance like a weight pressing against his chest. The princess still clung to him, her small hand wrapped around the edge of his sleeve, her wide eyes filled with trust. He wanted to speak, to say something that might ease the tension, but his throat was dry, and his thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. The human had come only as an envoy, carrying messages of peace from his world to theirs. He had imagined long talks, perhaps difficult debates, but never this. He had expected to be questioned about trade, about treaties, about the old wars that still lingered in memory. Instead, the princess had spoken one word, and now he stood at the center of the greatest mystery of the empire. The nobles whispered again, their voices rising like ripples in water. Some asked if the child was mistaken. Others claimed it could not be a mistake at all. A few of the older nobles muttered about legends long forgotten, stories of bonds between humans and their kind from centuries past. The human caught pieces of these whispers, but he could not grasp their meaning. All he knew was that the king's eyes had not left him, sharp as blades, searching for a truth that even he did not know. The queen remained quiet, her face calm but unreadable. Her silence unsettled him more than the king's anger. She did not defend him, nor did she accuse him. Instead, she simply watched, her gaze moving between him and her daughter as though she carried a secret too heavy to speak. Aloud, he wondered if she already knew why the princess had chosen him, why she had spoken that word with such certainty. He lowered his eyes to the princess. She smiled at him as if nothing were wrong, as if she had known him all her life. There was no fear in her expression, only joy. "Daddy," she said again, her voice softer this time, almost like a whisper meant only for him. The hall shook with murmurs at her words. The human took a slow breath and forced himself to stand taller. He could not let fear rule him, not here, not now. He bowed to the king, trying to show respect even while confusion filled his heart. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice steady though his hands trembled at his sides. "I do not know why she calls me this. I do not seek to take what is not mine. I am only a guest, nothing more." The king's expression did not change. He remained still, though the silence between them felt like a storm about to break. Finally, the king lifted his hand, and the court fell quiet again. "Then we will see," he said slowly, his voice like stone dragged across the floor. "The truth will show itself." At his signal, guards stepped forward, not to strike but to surround the human. They did not touch him, but their presence was clear. He was no longer a guest. He was now a subject of the king's judgment. The princess held tighter to his sleeve, her face turning worried for the first time. She looked up at him, then at her father, and then back again, as if she could not understand why the hall had grown so cold. "Daddy," she said once more, her voice trembling. The human's heart ached at the sound. He did not know this child, yet something deep within him stirred, something he could not explain. It was as if her voice reached a place inside him that had been empty for years, and now it was filled. He wanted to deny it, to tell himself it was only a mistake, but the feeling was real, too real to ignore. The nobles began to argue among themselves. Some demanded the human be removed from the hall at once, calling his presence dangerous. Others whispered that the princess's words could not be dismissed, that destiny itself might be speaking through her. The noise grew louder until it filled the chamber like thunder. The queen finally raised her hand, and at once the voices quieted. Her calm presence spread across the hall like cool water over fire. She turned her gaze to the king, her lips parting as if she might speak, but then she stopped, and her eyes drifted back to the human. For a brief moment, he thought he saw something in her expression, a flicker of sadness, or perhaps of truth hidden too long. The king looked at her, waiting, but when she remained silent, his jaw tightened. He sat back down on his throne, his voice firm. "The court will continue at dawn," he said. "Until then, the human will remain under guard. No harm will come to him, but he will not leave these walls." The nobles bowed, though many still exchanged curious glances. The guards stepped closer, guiding the human away from the center of the hall. The princess clung to him until the very last moment, her small hand slipping from his sleeve as he was led away. Her voice, faint but clear, echoed one final time across the silent chamber. "Daddy." The human's steps slowed as the word followed him. He did not understand why she called him that, nor why her gaze felt so familiar. But deep inside, a thought took root, a thought that frightened him more than the king's stare. What if the child was not wrong? What if the truth she carried was something far greater than any of them knew? The night inside the alien palace was quiet, but it was not the kind of quiet that brought peace. It was the kind of quiet that carried hidden questions, whispers, and fears. The human sat alone in a chamber given to him by the guards, his thoughts heavy, his heart restless. He replayed the moment in the court again and again. The princess's innocent voice calling him daddy, the shock in the king's eyes, and the silence of the queen. Nothing made sense, yet he could not escape the memory. He felt as if that single word had tied him to a fate he did not understand. Outside his chamber, the guards stood watch, their eyes sharp, their movements stiff. They treated him with formality, but no warmth. He was neither friend nor enemy. He was something in between, something uncertain. The human tried to rest, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the princess's face. It was not just her word that stayed with him, but also the strange connection. He felt in her presence, as if she had unlocked a hidden part of him that had always been waiting. Meanwhile, in the grand hall, the nobles had not stopped whispering. Stories flowed like water between them. Some remembered old tales of secret experiments, times when humans and aliens had shared knowledge in ways that were now forbidden to speak of. They wondered if the princess carried something in her, blood that was not fully alien. Others dismissed such talk as dangerous nonsense, saying it was simply a child's mistake. But even those voices shook with doubt, for no child of royal blood had ever spoken such a word to a stranger before. The queen walked through the palace corridors with a steady pace, her face calm as always, but her mind carried storms of its own. She remembered things long buried, choices made in silence, and truths she had hidden even from the king. She had hoped they would never come to light, but the princess's voice had broken the fragile wall she had built around the past. The queen looked toward the chamber where the human was kept and paused for a moment, her hand resting lightly against the wall. Her eyes softened, though no one was there to see. The princess, in her room, refused to sleep. She kept asking the servants when she could see the human again. "My daddy," she whispered again and again, hugging her blanket close. The servants tried to comfort her, telling her she must wait for the morning, but she shook her head and whispered to herself, as if she knew something they could not understand. Her words were simple, but her heart carried a certainty far beyond her years. As the night deepened, rumors began to move not only through the court, but through the city beyond. The story of the princess's word had already slipped past the palace walls. In the markets and streets, people whispered that the royal heir had chosen a human as her father. Some laughed at it, others were unsettled, and a few began to wonder what it might mean for the empire's future. Every whisper made the secret harder to contain. The king sat alone in his private chamber, his face carved with shadows. He had built his throne on strength, on honor, on the pride of his people. But now his daughter's voice had shaken the foundation of it all. He could not understand why she had spoken that word, and the silence of the queen only deepened his unease. He thought of the human, a stranger who stood in his hall without history, without ties, yet somehow linked to his child. His mind searched for answers, but none came. The human, too, sat with questions that refused to leave him. He thought of his own world, of the past of his people. There had been stories, old records of contact between humans and other races, but most were hidden or lost. He remembered fragments, things told to him as a child, rumors of bonds that went beyond treaties, whispers of shared blood. Could it be possible that those stories had not been myths after all? As dawn approached, the palace stirred again. The court would meet, and the king would demand answers, but the human knew he had none to give. He could not explain why the princess had chosen him. All he could do was face the storm with the same calm the child herself carried. And deep inside, though he tried to deny it, the feeling grew stronger. When the princess had called him daddy, it had not felt like a mistake. It had felt like the truth. The first light of morning touched the palace walls, painting them in soft shades of gold. The great court prepared once more, the nobles, gathering in restless clusters, their voices low but filled with expectation. The memory of the princess's words still clung to every corner of the hall. No one could forget the silence, the shock, the way the king's eyes had turned to stone. Today, they hoped, answers would be found. The human was brought back into the hall, guarded but not harmed. He walked with steady steps, though his heart carried weight heavier than chains. He felt the eyes of every noble fixed upon him, their gazes searching for secrets he did not have. He glanced once toward the throne and saw the king seated, his face stern, his presence commanding. But his eyes quickly moved to the queen, and there he found something different: her calm expression, her stillness that seemed almost like quiet sorrow. The princess, sitting beside her mother, lit up when she saw him. She rose quickly, her small steps hurrying across the hall, her voice ringing once more. "Daddy," the word echoed, softer than yesterday, yet just as powerful. Whispers spread again, the nobles stirring in disbelief. Some shook their heads, others leaned closer to catch every word that might follow. The king's jaw tightened, but he did not stop her. He only watched. The child reached the human and held his hand with innocent trust. The guards hesitated, but allowed it, for even they could not break the bond the princess herself insisted upon. The human looked down at her, his heart unsteady. Her touch was light, but it carried something deeper, something that made him feel both comforted and unsettled at once. The king's voice cut through the noise of the court. "This cannot continue," he said firmly. "The truth will be spoken here, before us all. Why does the heir of this throne see a human as her father?" His eyes moved to the queen, sharp with demand. "You will answer." The hall grew still. Every noble leaned forward. For a long moment, the queen remained silent, her gaze steady on the human and the child holding his hand. Then, at last, she rose. Her steps were graceful, her presence commanding without effort. She stood beside her daughter, her eyes softening as she looked upon her. "She is not mistaken," the queen said quietly, yet her words carried to every corner of the hall. A ripple of shock moved through the nobles. The human's breath caught, and the king's expression darkened. Though he did not interrupt, the queen lifted her chin, her voice steady. "Years ago, long before this court, before this empire knew peace, there were exchanges with the humans, not of war, but of knowledge. Experiments were made. Bonds were tested. Some of that past was buried, hidden, forgotten even by most who sit here now. But not all of it was lost." Her words hung in the air, and the nobles began to murmur, the old stories suddenly alive in their minds. The human's thoughts raced as he remembered fragments of his own people's history, the half-spoken tales of secret ties with alien races. Could it be true? Could the princess carry part of that history in her very blood? The queen turned her gaze directly to the human. Her eyes held a strange softness, a kind of understanding that unsettled him. "You wonder why she sees you as her father," she said. "It is not because of chance. In her blood flows something that binds her to your kind. She sees in you what others cannot, a truth she cannot explain. Yet one she feels, the princess, squeezed his hand as if to prove the queen's words. The human felt a chill run through him. But it was not fear, it was recognition, a connection that went beyond reason, beyond history. Something written deeper than memory. The king rose from his throne, his presence filling the hall. His voice thundered, though still controlled. You would bring this secret into my house, into my bloodline. You would tie the heir of my throne to a human. His words carried more pain than anger, yet he did not strike nor condemn. Instead, he turned his eyes to the human, heavy with demand. If what she says is true, then you must hold a piece of this past within you. Speak. What do you know of this? The human's heart pounded. He wanted to say he knew nothing, that he was only a messenger. Yet deep inside, pieces of memory stirred childhood stories, hidden records, things that had never made sense until this very moment. He had never believed them, but now, with the princess holding his hand and the queen's words in the air, those fragments felt real. He lifted his eyes to the throne and spoke quietly. I do not know the full truth, but perhaps the past has chosen this moment to return. His words were simple, but they struck the court like a spark in dry grass. Whispers rose again, fear mixing with wonder. The queen placed her hand gently on the princess's shoulder, her voice calm yet firm. The child has chosen not by mistake, but by instinct. Her bond with him cannot be broken by denial. The king's face was unreadable as he looked between his daughter, his queen, and the human. His silence was heavier than words. Around them, the nobles trembled between doubt and belief, caught in the storm of a truth too great to ignore. And so, the secret was no longer hidden. The bloodline of the princess carried more than royal heritage. It carried a piece of humanity itself. The days that followed were filled with whispers, questions, and long silences that hung heavy in the great palace. The alien court had always been a place of certainty, but now every corridor echoed with doubts. The nobles spoke in hushed voices about the human, and many tried to guess what made the princess speak that word. Some claimed it was a mistake, a slip of the tongue, while others swore it was destiny. The king listened to none of them, but his silence made the tension even stronger. The queen often stood by the balcony at night, her eyes watching the stars, as though she was searching for answers beyond the sky. Meanwhile, the princess stayed close to the human, her trust in him unshaken. As if she had known him all her life, she asked him questions no one dared to answer, about Earth, about love, about what it meant to be family. Her innocent curiosity softened even the coldest hearts among the servants who saw them together. The human himself felt torn. He did not fully understand why the princess had chosen him for such a word, but he could not deny the bond that had formed between them. When she smiled at him, it felt like a hidden truth was being revealed, a truth the court did not want to face. Slowly, others began to see it too. The princess laughed freely only when he was near, and she looked braver when she walked beside him. It was as though her spirit found strength in his presence, and the court could not ignore it forever. One evening, the king called for a private gathering, with only the queen, the princess, and the human present. The hall was dim, lit by soft light, and the king's voice was calm but heavy with meaning. He asked the human simple questions, yet every word carried weight. Why did the princess trust him so deeply? What bond existed that the court could not see? The human answered carefully, with honesty in his voice. He said he did not come to claim anything, nor to stand above them. He was only here because fate had placed him near the princess, and she chose to see him as something more. The king studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable, while the princess clung to the human's side, her eyes wide and determined. The queen, watching silently, seemed to hold her breath. Something was shifting in that hall, something greater than titles or power. It was not a matter of thrones or crowns anymore. It was about trust, and what the heart recognized even when the mind could not. And in that moment, the king finally spoke words that left all three of them unsettled. He said the bond between the princess and the human was not a mistake, nor an accident. It was something that could not be broken so easily. But then he warned that the court, the nobles, and the entire kingdom would not understand. He told them that the storm was only beginning, and how they faced it would decide the fate of all of them. The princess held the human's hand more tightly, as if to say she would never let go, no matter what storms came their way. And the queen finally turned her gaze from the shadows to the human, her eyes softer now, but filled with questions, yet to be answered. Something far greater was waiting just beyond the silence, and none of them could escape it. The storm the king spoke of soon arrived, not with thunder in the sky but with unrest in the hearts of the nobles. Whispers spread across the kingdom, and every hall was filled with speculation about the princess, the human, and the strange bond they shared. Many feared it, some rejected it, and a few quietly admired the courage of the young princess who dared to speak what others would never imagine. The human became a quiet center of attention, watched closely wherever he walked. Servants bowed to him more carefully, though their eyes carried questions they dared not voice. The princess never left his side, and her presence gave him strength. Even when doubt weighed heavily on his heart, she spoke to him with trust, her words gentle, and it became clear to many that this was not a passing fancy but something deeper. The queen, once distant, began to notice how her daughter's laughter returned only when the human was near. She watched the way the princess looked at him, not with fear or confusion, but with a certainty only the heart could carry. Slowly, her own doubts began to soften, though she never spoke of it openly. The king, however, remained silent, his gaze unreadable, as if waiting for the right moment to reveal what he truly thought. That moment came during a grand gathering when the nobles demanded answers. The court was full, the air heavy with expectation, and all eyes turned to the throne. The princess, without hesitation, stepped forward and placed her hand into the human's before the entire court. A hush fell, every noble frozen in disbelief. Her small voice carried across the hall, steady and clear, as she declared that she trusted the human more than anyone else, that to her he was not just a guest, not just an outsider, but something her heart had already chosen. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, but none dared interrupt her. The king finally stood, his robe trailing across the steps, his face solemn as he looked first at the princess, then at the human. For a long silence, no one dared breathe, and then, in a voice calm yet powerful, he spoke words that would be remembered for generations. He said that though the court might question, though the nobles might whisper, no one could change the truth the princess had spoken. Bonds were not written by titles or crowns. They were chosen by hearts that could see what others could not. The queen lowered her head, her eyes soft as though she finally understood. The nobles fell silent, unsure whether to object or to accept. But none could deny the courage they had witnessed. The human, standing with the princess's hand in his, felt something shift inside him. For the first time, he was not just a visitor in their world, he was part of it. The princess smiled up at him, her trust unbroken, and in that smile was the promise of a new beginning. The court would never be the same again. The story of that moment spread beyond the palace walls, carried on whispers and rattled as legend. The day the alien princess called a human daddy, the world held its breath, and nothing was ever the same.